面白い。
ゾルトラーク。
I'm literally gonna wait for you. And I see you're gonna be like, nah, I'm not gonna like it. I'm just keep watching.
Just subscribe.
And you think the clip gonna cut right here, but it's not, because I'm still waiting for you to click that like button. And the subscribe and the post notification button.
So it's finally about time that I talk about an anime that I've been thinking about for the longest time. In fact, it's been an anime that's been on my radar for a very long time, ever since it dropped in fact. But then I kind of decided that I need to be patient with this anime, because after watching the first few episodes, I realized that this is a journey, and for me to properly appreciate what's gonna happen, I need to take my time and not just rush into my verdict or just what I think about it. Well, until today. Yes! And this anime that I'm talking about is Frieren. And I'm sure some of you at this point probably thought, he's probably not gonna talk about this anime, is he? Well, guess you were wrong.
Joke's on you, I'm into that!
But anyway, Frieren is a pretty interesting anime, not only just because of its story, but because of how it's gained popularity. Because of course it's a pretty interesting anime, but also it's got a pretty interesting fan base that come from different places. I know what you're doing with that anime.
Oh, God, what I wouldn't do to that. What? No, it's not even mine. I just clicked on it.
But anyway, for me to basically tell you about this awesome anime, I have to give you the story, right? So basically what happens is we follow Frieren. Now Frieren, for those who don't know, is an elf. An interesting fact about elves is that they live a pretty long time, which is going to be an interesting point later onwards within the story. But basically it follows Frieren, who is an elf, and she happens to be a mage, which is basically like, you know, she can do magic. That's what she can do.
Good, what did I take from you?
And while she's just on her own, she gets discovered by a party. Now, not the type of party you think it is, but actually more of the Dungeons and Dragons type of party, in which originally the party consisted of 3 individuals, Himmel, Hirta, and Eisen. So they decide that they want Frieren to join their team, and despite her reluctantly not wanting to join them, eventually she joins them. And I'm sure at this point you're wondering, what's the mission? Well, the mission is defeat the Demon King. I think that's pretty much always the gist of these types of adventures. There's probably a pretty evil force and we have to defeat it. So let's get a group together and then go and defeat it, which is ultimately what happens, in which basically Frieren and her party are able to defeat the Demon King and basically become heroes. Now at this point I'm sure you probably think that I've just spoiled the entire plot for you. Well, not really. The first episode is actually the end, in that we meet them after they've completed their goal and they're just pretty much heroes now and they're going into retirement, which is pretty much an interesting question of what do you do once you've killed this evil force? I guess just live out the rest of your life in peace, right? So it happens. And then what results is Frieren decides to go on an adventure. Despite the adventure taking years off her life and, well, some time, it doesn't bother her because she's gonna be here for a pretty long time. So she decides to just go on a journey and collect magic, because that's pretty much her hobby. At this point you would think, well, that's a pretty anticlimactic story.
Please, sir. I want some more.
Well, kinda is. Ultimately what happens is that she just goes on an adventure collecting things, and then she gets some news that one of her party members is pretty close to death, which is understandable considering that one of them is a human, and it's Himmel. Now, Himmel will play a pretty interesting factor, later onwards when I explain it to you, but basically he's the leader, and he's about to die. So everybody comes back together and they just have a good time for the last time, and eventually he passes. And after his passing, everybody decides to just carry on their retirement, so to speak. So basically, once again, we're forced to follow Frieren, just wander around and search for magic. And at this point, you start start to wonder what is the purpose and the point of this story. Ultimately, it seems as though that Frieren is just wandering around and collecting magic until she dies. But then something tragic happens again. And what happens is that the priest is, well, getting old, which is natural. But now the issue is that the priest has a girl with him, and this girl's name is Fern, of which the priest asks Frieren if she could just teach Fern magic so that she can be able to survive once he's gone. And well, Frieren agrees to help her because she really likes magic to a certain degree, and basically takes Fern under her wing. But after a while, Frieren realizes that the priest has basically just given her an apprentice, of which she gladly takes because, well, eventually he passes. And now you have Frieren, who is a person who was just wandering around and basically didn't really have a goal, now accompanied by an apprentice who she's supposed to mentor and help her develop, which makes the journey, I guess, a bit more interesting. But still, Frieren doesn't really have a purpose, so she just goes around wandering and just collecting magic. But then as she has certain conversations with Fern, you start to discover something pretty interesting, in that some of the actions that Frieren takes are based on the past. She's constantly reminiscing about the past, specifically Himmel, because you can see that Himmel had a pretty huge effect on her and kind of molded her to be the person she is, as well as the rest of her party members, but specifically him. And as we see her go around basically from town to town, just wandering, trying to collect spells, she's making sure to kind of reminisce about certain moments that she experienced, but also make sure that all of the statues that her hero friend had gotten are taken care of. So it just seems as though she's just on a journey of reminiscing and just trying to make sure that everybody is remembered. But well, along the way with Fern, we start to discover that Frieren is different in that, well, because she lives such a long life, she kind of is numb to a lot of things, and in fact she seems extremely pretty cold to a lot of things, because along the journey with Fern, you realize that Frieren doesn't really see time the way you and me do. So you start to notice the first interesting thing about this anime, which is the perspective of time, and you realize it when you look back on the journeys that she's had by herself. A lot of the characters that she would meet would sometimes turn from little kids to old men or old women, and then it would hit you that that little journey that just seemed to be like a little montage for us was years, sometimes even decades. And that messed up perspective makes you wonder, what type of life does Fern have to live, because she's following this person who's just wandering around and doesn't care about time at all. But then through the conversations that she has with Fern, you realize that, well, she's wandering, but she kind of has a reason for that, because, well, it may seem like it's nothing to someone else, but she wants to spend the rest of her life just reminiscing about the good days and eventually dying, because she's accomplished her goal. At this point, what else could she really want? But then the journey takes an interesting turn when she meets up with her old friend Eisen, of which after having a certain conversation with him, she comes to the realization that maybe she should go on a journey. Because she's been reminiscing so much about some of her lost party members, she just decides that why not actually go on a mission that seemed impossible, which was a mission to find heaven, of which her old mentor had told her is a place that exists. So for Frieren, who's a person who's been reminiscing constantly and just moving around the world just because she'd been there with her old party or just remembers certain things from those places, now has a more focused goal. Essentially, she's just doing the first mission that she did with her first party all over again and going on that journey. So that's basically what happens. And then along the way, they meet another interesting character who eventually joins Frieren's party, and that's Stark, who funny enough is the apprentice of Eisen. Stark's mission is that he wants to have a bunch of stories that he can tell Eisen, which is understandable because Eisen is a hero, so he wants to come back with his own heroic tales to make Eisen happy, which is a pretty simplistic task, but it's a pretty good-hearted task. I'm sure you're also wondering, what does Fern want to do? Well, Fern just wants to be as good as possible and basically be the type of person that the priest would be proud of which doesn't seem like a pretty focused goal, but she's still figuring herself out, and considering she's pretty young, it's okay at this point. But basically, the three of them then go on a journey to find heaven, so to speak. But funny enough, heaven is literally located near the place, well, where they fought the Demon King, so they're gonna have to go back there again and possibly deal with demons.
Leave me alone! Akira!
which are pretty problematic within this world, but that's a story for another day. So now, upon this journey, you start to realize certain things. It seems as though the anime just opens up, because even though the anime is essentially about Frieren going on that journey to find heaven, there's a lot of factors within this anime that make it super unique and pretty special. Because for one, Frieren's perspective of time is just always a constant reminder throughout the anime. She thinks differently from most people. It's kind of weird whenever you see people talk about legendary tales for Frieren to just react normally, realizing that she had been there before. In fact, Frieren had done so many things that people have kind of even forgotten about her. They talk about her as a legend, and she's right there, which is kind of interesting because it seems like she hasn't fully appreciated the legacy that she has. But it's understandable because considering how old she is in her elf years, she's pretty young, so it doesn't really matter that much to her. So that perspective is constantly weird and funny, because it's weird seeing an individual who's so old act a bit childish and weird, but then it kind of hits you that she is relatively young considering her age. So that part of the anime makes it super weird. But then also along this journey, you start to see certain negative things about Frieren, because well, Frieren is super blank in that she doesn't seem to express much emotion. Nothing really seems to please her that much except for memories of her friends, but besides that, she just seems as though she doesn't care about anything. And in fact, the one interesting thing that I noticed about this anime is that Frieren is the main character, but weirdly enough in this anime, the world is the main character, because until Frieren meets Fern and Stark and certain members of her party, her journey is a very quiet one. And you can tell within the anime because you just see a montage of a person just moving around and just music playing. It's a pretty silent journey, but when she meets the people that she does, the journey just becomes more vibrant and more loud. And then you start to realize that even though Frieren may not be the most interesting character, it's understandable considering the fact that she literally will outlive everybody that she meets most of the time, which would probably take a pretty negative mental toll on you, because well, she has to constantly deal with the ever-present issue of everybody around her dying, so she has to adopt this behavior to kind of maintain a level of sanity. But for us who are watching her, she's a pretty quiet type of main character, but it's the people around her who have conversations with her or how they interact with her that makes her quirky, that kind of gives her life, because without them she just seems like a doll just wandering around with no real purpose. But the people around her literally give her emotions and feelings. They make her come alive, and it's interesting to see Frieren come alive in certain moments and just be funny or just goofy, realizing that she's not really this stone cold dead person who doesn't have anything to offer. She's a pretty interesting character. So it's pretty interesting to see an anime play with that, because ultimately, though she may be the main character, she's not really the main character. It's the world itself. It's characters like Stark and Fern and all of the people she meets along the way who really are the storytellers and the people who help the stories begin and end, which is a pretty interesting thing, which kind of adds to the story writing aspect, because well, in most of the fantasy type of stories, it's usually the stories that you get from other people or certain party members besides the main character. They kind of make the journey and legend more funny. Some of the goofy little tales that they tell, or just some of the really dark tales that they tell. So it's pretty interesting that this anime is able to play on that and have a character who's basically a blank canvas in which the world around her paints what she is that day or that episode. So it's pretty interesting to see that happen. But well, I have to be realistic as well. This could be seen as a negative, because though I just told you that this anime has a pretty interesting scheme and just a very interesting way of writing a story and a pretty interesting main character, I could see how someone could, well, look at Frieren in a negative way, because it can be difficult for you to develop a connection with her, because she's just so within herself that you kind of don't really know her that well. Despite the stories, you don't really know what makes her tick, except for the moments when you get a memory, then you realize certain things about her. But she's so guarded with her emotions that it's difficult for you to develop a connection with her as a character. And as well, the whole thing of her needing people to basically kind of bring her to life could be considered a negative, because it means that she's unable to stand stand on her own. And also the fact that this anime takes its time can be seen as something negative as well, because it took a bunch of episodes for me to really build a connection with Frieren. Not just the character, but the anime, because of just how the slow pacedness of this anime, and that it's prepared to take its time to tell a good story. It can be difficult to kind of connect to the anime, considering also the main character being the quite quiet type. It can be difficult to be patient for this anime to have that moment where you build a connection, where you start to be empathetic and sympathetic to certain stories and understand characters more, because you've basically been on that journey with them, which takes time. So that can be seen as a negative, but ultimately I don't think that that's enough for this anime to be thrown away, because I think that that aspect of it taking time can kind of be seen as a realistic thing of building a relationship. You see that along the way she's building a relationship with everyone that she meets, including her own party members, and that it takes time for her to fully understand everyone and also for them to understand her. And you see that throughout situations where maybe it's someone's birthday and now everybody's like trying to figure out, what do you like, what do you do? So you kind of see that natural organic building of a relationship and building of a world, but it requires you to be pretty patient. So the thing that I've noticed about this anime is that it is a pretty incredible anime. The animation is pretty good. They went crazy, I won't lie. It's really good. And also the music, especially the OST, is sensational. Especially for an anime that has a lot of quiet scenes, the music makes such a huge difference and creates this beautiful ambiance that just takes it to another level. So ultimately you're getting a pretty good anime that tells you a pretty interesting story, has good music, and also the animation is very good. And also, last thing, I know why some of you watch this anime. I know the truth. I won't tell no one unless you sub. If you sub, I won't tell anyone what you do with that anime and how you watch certain things about that anime. But that's only if you sub.
If you don't, I'll tell you for.
I might tell anyone anyway. But basically, this anime has a pretty interesting fan base coming from certain areas. But that's another story for another day. But that doesn't take away from the fact that this is a pretty amazing anime. And though the journey's not over and we're moving on to a certain arc, I think that this is an anime that's going to be about a journey. It's a journey anime. Not everything's gonna happen so quick, and it will take time. This is gonna be a pretty interesting anime to watch, not just for this season, but for the entire journey.